Giovanni is an interesting character. I find it curious how he calls himself evil and criminal and sinister, suggesting that he understands and acknowledges the not just illegal, but also immoral nature of his actions. But if something goes against your morals, why would you keep doing it? Let's see if we can figure this out. I'm going to look at Giovanni's story, focused primarily on the Kanto story arc, through the lens of Team Rocket as a Yakuza. Yakuza are organized crime syndicates, just like the Mafia, hence why the localization team gave him an Italian name, and the anime gave him a Lap Persian. I think that analyzing Giovanni from that particular angle can help us understand better how Team Rocket operated in Kanto and shed some light on the shadowy figure of Giovanni. Before we dive in though, I want to acknowledge that I am not an expert on Yakuza. I did reach out to some journalists and academics for an interview, but I wasn't able to book any of them. So I'm relying entirely on my own research. I was as thorough as I reasonably could, and all of my sources are listed in the description, but there's still a chance that I got some things wrong. With that out of the way, let's have a quick look at the history of Yakuza. They likely developed during the Edo period out of organizations of peddlers, petty criminals, and gamblers. As the organizations grew, they became a home, a family for some of the most marginalized members of society. Jake Adelstein, a crime writer and journalist working in Japan, comments that Yakuza members tend to be from those marginalized in Japanese society traditionally. The Korean Japanese, whose parents and grandparents were brought into Japan as slave laborers, and members of the former outcast class of Japan, according to Mitsuhiro Suganuma, a former officer of the Public Security Intelligence Agency. As their numbers grew throughout the 20th century, their methods of operation also evolved. According to Eiko Maruko Siniaur, professor of history at Williams College, as the economy recovered, the Yakuza transitioned out of the black markets and returned to traditional industries such as gambling, bars, restaurants, prostitution, and labor racketeering. Fueled by the proceeds from their successful business ventures, the post-war Yakuza developed into expansive and sophisticated mafia syndicates. Operating fundamentally as businesses, Yakuza Group's financial interests were particularly salient in encouraging their nationalist leanings and lubricating their relationship with the state. It made financial sense to maintain a good relationship with the ruling conservative hegemony, who as lawmakers and government officials could crimp the sources of Yakuza income. Conservatives were also more likely than liberals to side with management in labor disputes, and, as in the interwar period, the company, and not the labor unions, had the funds to pay for extra muscle during strikes. The vocal and widespread condemnation of Yakuza ruffianism and seemingly unjust state violence may have discouraged the more blatant and visible forms of state Yakuza cooperation in the decades to come, but it did not extinguish it. Indeed, it had the unintended consequence of replacing some criminal violence with corruption, for money could be more surreptitious than physical force, rendering even more murky the extent of the relationship between the Yakuza and the state. With time, Yakuza became entrenched in the structures of Japanese society, from the state and the political class to private companies and investment firms. Journalist Grant Newsham writes that Westerners too often imagine the stereotype of curly-haired louts with tattoos and missing fingers making money from drugs, prostitution, extortion, illegal gambling, and loan sharking. All in all, a lurid and exotic part of Japanese society, but harmless in the grand scheme of things. This has always been an oversimplification, especially over the past 25 years, as the Yakuza became a permanent and expanding fixture in the legitimate Japanese economy, including the upper reaches of the financial industry. Well, 25 years ago is just when the Generation 1 and 2 games were being released, just as this transition was starting to happen. And this is where we can jump into Giovanni's own story. Giovanni used to run the Viridian City gym too long ago, he says. We may think this means it was before he joined Team Rocket, but that may not be the case. Newsham notes that the godfather of godfathers, Kazuo Taoka, third-generation leader of the largest syndicate, Yamaguchi-gumi, told members in the late 1950s that they all needed to have a legitimate business as well. It seems quite likely, given how well established Team Rocket is, that Team Rocket existed before Giovanni, and Giovanni was just a member looking for a legitimate job to work at while rising through the ranks. For a powerful trainer with big ambitions, gym leader would have been a perfect option. and he remains there until he abandoned the position to take over Team Rocket. That probably doesn't seem like a huge parallel between the Rockets and the Yakuza, but it's only the start. Your first run-in with Team Rocket is in Mount Moon, and the very first Rocket you can encounter in the games loudly and proudly announces that we, Team Rocket, are Pokémon gangsters. And that probably seems silly, like why would you tell everyone that you're a criminal, but that's part of the deal with Yakuza. Unlike other organized crime groups around the world, the Yakuza have no interest in keeping a low profile, writes Anthony Bruno for the Crime Library. In fact, in most Japanese cities, Yakuza social clubs and gang headquarters are clearly marked with signs and logos prominently displayed. The Rockets are in Mount Moon looking for rare Pokemon and fossils that they can revive and sell for a profit. This leads us to the part of the Rocket enterprise that most clearly shows them as Yakuza, the Rocket Game Corner in Celadon City. It's clearly intended as a reference to pachinko parlors, which used to be big Yakuza business. More recently, the Yakuza have been largely driven out of the pachinko business, but a couple decades ago, it was huge. Of course, the Rocket hideout is inside of the Rocket Game Corner, but that's not the only way that the Game Corner is tied to crime. Among the prizes they offer are Pokemon like Abra, Pikachu, and Clefairy, coveted Pokemon that are hard to find if you don't know where to look.
Pikachu's in that corner in Viridian Forest.
Yes, only that one corner.
Yeah.
The more expensive prizes are the ones that really stand out, though. Pokemon like Scyther, Pinsir, and Dratini. These Pokemon may not even be native to the Kanto region, since in Generation 1, they could only be found in the Safari Zone, which functions like a cross between a zoo and a nature preserve. To me, this suggests that these prize Pokemon were poached, either from the Safari Zone or from Johto or another region where they are native. Team Rocket are Pokemon traffickers, which in this world makes them both animal traffickers and weapons traffickers, treating Pokemon as tools for business. There's another Pokemon you can get by playing in the Game Corner. In fact, you can only get it from the Game Corner, but we'll come back to it later. Because the Rocket Game Corner is just a low-level scheme. It's the kind of thing that you can have new recruits running without worrying too much about things going wrong. It probably isn't a legitimate business, and even if it is, it does not compare with the resources and the brand power of the Silph Company. Silph is a major corporate player in the Pokemon world, at least within the Kanto region, but we know that they have a Russian branch too. They produce some of the most valuable items for adventuring Pokemon trainers, like Pokeballs, potions, repels, and TMs, which puts a huge Yakuza target on the company for more than one reason. The obvious one is research and development. As we find out during the Rocket takeover of the Silph head office building, several Silph scientists were actually Rocket spies. They would be able to funnel Silph research to Team Rocket. This is probably how Giovanni got himself a Silph scope, a nifty device that helps you see the invisible. Very useful for the player to get through Pokemon Tower, but even more useful for Rocket scientists looking for Mew. Rocket spies are likely also the ones who alerted Giovanni that the prototype Master Ball, the world's first infallible Pokeball, had been successfully created. That's another very useful piece of technology if you make your money by catching rare Pokemon, and especially if you're trying to create and control the most powerful Pokemon known to science. But that's not all. According to the Crime Library, the Yakuza also make millions of dollars a year through corporate extortion, and the Sokaya, shareholders' meeting men, are the masters of this enterprise. Sokaya will buy a small number of shares in a company so that they can attend shareholders' meetings. In preparation for the meeting, the Sokaya gather damaging information about the company and its officers. Secret mistresses, tax evasion, unsafe factory conditions, and pollution are all fodder for the Sokaya. They will then contact the company's management and threaten to disclose whatever embarrassing information they have at the shareholders' meeting unless they are compensated. This is essentially what Giovanni was doing in his meeting with the president, the one that Red interrupted. He wanted the company to mass-produce Master Balls for Team Rocket.
Ooh, what's the dirty hat on him?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, though. But I also don't think that Rocket involvement with Silph comes down to just the technology. In Let's Go, the dialogue in the scene was expanded somewhat, and what we get here suggests a deeper involvement. "Now that I know who you really are," says the president, "there is no way I want to make a thing like that. Not for someone like you." "We had a deal," Giovanni retorts. "You agreed to this." Giovanni and Silph were in business. Mr. President just didn't know before that Giovanni was a rocket. He probably just thought he was another investor with deep pockets. The Yamaguchi-gumi have been called Japan's second largest private equity group, writes Jake Adelstein, because they are gamblers and they are privy to and willing to use insider information. They see the stock market as a casino where they are the house. Grant Newsham adds that, in terms of sophistication, global reach, and funding, Yakuza are practically indistinguishable from their legitimate counterparts. Of course, they have one advantage that many hedge funds do not: the threat of violence, and no scruples about blackmailing company executives to make them do what they want them to do. Team Rocket has a lot of money. Giovanni is known for wearing excellent suits, so we know that he has money to spare. They also have an extensive army of grunts to keep paid and fed. And they have a massive research project to fund. Investment in and extortion from legitimate, powerful companies like Silph has to be part of how they secure that cash flow. As an aside, I just need to point out that the president was perhaps noble, but also extremely foolhardy in resisting Giovanni. I have no doubt that Giovanni would follow through on his threats, and he only doesn't because Red barges in to save the president's neck. Don't deal with Yakuza, kids. And this is a bit of a tangent, but research for this video led me to a realization that I'm kind of surprised hadn't clicked before. We know that the Rockets infiltrated Silph and the Pokémon League, but they also infiltrated the Pokémon Lab on Cinnabar Island. We've long been aware that Mr. Fuji of Lavender Town is likely also Dr. Fuji, the founder of the Pokémon Lab, and Mr. Fuji's familiarity with the Rockets in Pokémon Tower supports that. But it's not just a matter of one man who has worked with both organizations. The president of Silph at one point says to Giovanni, "And give up any thought of forcing us to create powerful Pokémon for you. Using stolen research to create Pokémon, that's not something Silph should ever do." The stolen research he's talking about is probably from the Pokémon Lab. For one, a document in Silph informs us that Porygon was developed by the lab, but the only place where the player can find one is the Rocket Game Corner prize counter. But remember also that the Rockets were in Mount Moon looking for fossils to revive, another technology developed by the Pokémon Lab, another technology the Rockets stole. Another bit of research to help Project Mewtwo along. With the destroyed Pokemon Mansion where Mewtwo was created being basically next door to the Pokemon Lab, I'm tempted to say the lab is just another rocket front. The research wouldn't technically be stolen in that case, but the Silph president might not know that. Either way, some very close ties there.
What if Mr. Fuji / Dr. Fuji, he is the founder of the lab, right? Giovanni is just another investor in that lab, and it's just basically the same thing. Rather than like the lab being a rocket front, it is just another place for rockets.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like it could be a rocket front because clearly they are very close ties, but it could just be another place where they are influencing where the research goes and stealing research from. All right, so we've talked about how Team Rocket operates on the ground level with gambling and Pokemon trafficking at the Game Corner. About how they manipulate corporations to make money through investments and extortion, and about how they amass scientific, technical knowledge from the Silph Company and the Cinnabar Pokemon Lab. And considering the Rockets are Yakuza, there is a good chance they've got their fingers in the state as well, with police and government officials looking the other way to let everything run smoothly. If you've ever wondered why police never seem to be the ones stopping them, there's probably a reason.
Officer Jenny, how could you? You're my hero.
A lot of what Giovanni does is specifically working towards Project Mewtwo. The Silph Scope to find Mew, DNA and artificial Pokemon technology to create Mewtwo, the Master Ball to control it, and tons of cash to fund it all. But what we haven't quite figured out yet is why. By any definition, Giovanni is evil. He is immoral in the way that he treats other people and Pokemon. The Silph takeover was not a subtle affair. It scared and probably traumatized a ton of Silph employees. He extorts and spies and steals from others for his own benefit. He sees Pokemon who are living, intelligent creatures as little more than equipment that he can use or sell for a profit as needed. But he isn't sadistic. He doesn't inflict pain and suffering just because he thinks it's fun. Every time he is defeated by Red, he may be frustrated, but he accepts the loss. He takes a step back and makes a new plan. Giovanni is doing what all expert political players do. He is being ruthlessly pragmatic. He has his goal, and he will do what he needs to do to achieve it, even if it means setting his morals aside. I think that's why he's able to recognize the immorality of his actions. He just won't let morality get in the way of his ultimate goal. And his ultimate goal is the same of all expert political players: power. In the Pokemon world, when we talk about power and powerful trainers and powerful Pokemon, we're usually talking about strength, the ability to defeat others. That is a kind of power that Giovanni has and wants more of, that's why he made Mewtwo, but it's not his ultimate goal. In a world where Pokemon are weapons, even the weapons of war, superiority on the Pokemon battlefield is equivalent to military superiority. It's the ability to force people to do what you want. It's the ability to conquer, both literally and metaphorically. It is the ability to amass power, the other kind of power, the kind that means influence. That's the kind of power that Giovanni is truly after. There is no such thing as good or evil when it comes to power, Giovanni says. There is only power, and those who are willing to use it. I'm not sure if I agree that power is inherently amoral, but a lot of people do think that way. Giovanni's not the only one. In the Kanto games, Giovanni failed. He lost Mewtwo and he was repeatedly defeated by Red, to the point that he realized that his ultimate goal was unattainable and disbanded Team Rocket. He went off to study and train on his own. It's unclear whether he was planning all along to rebuild and return, but he did have confidence in the organization that he built. After all, putting together the potential of many is how you produce a huge power. That's what an organization is. That's the strength of an organization. The executives were able to rebuild somewhat, waiting for their Oyabun to step back into the light. Ever the pragmatist, Giovanni was ready to answer that call, but thanks to Celebi, Ethan, and Lyra, he never did. And as far as we know, Team Rocket is disbanded for good. Maybe Giovanni did end up with a quiet life outside of crime. But there's another timeline in which Red is the one who failed. He didn't defeat Giovanni in time to prevent him from getting a Master Ball. He caught Mewtwo and used its strength to attain all of the political power he could hope for in his world. This time, knowing that his ultimate goal was attainable, he transformed Team Rocket into Rainbow Rocket and searched the multiverse for more power to amass. If he fails in one world, that's okay. He knows there are worlds out there where he will succeed. He ends up in Alola, in Pokemon Go, and in Pasio in Pokemon Masters. And in Pasio, Giovanni doesn't just have Mewtwo under his control. Giovanni puts Mewtwo through another experiment, causing suffering to both Mewtwo and countless other Pokemon on the island. But in the end, the newly mega-evolved Mewtwo joins Giovanni willingly. Witness Mewtwo's true power! The power of our shared penchant for evil. We haven't seen the last of Giovanni yet. I hope that you enjoyed this all-around look at Giovanni, Team Rocket, the events of the Kanto games, and the Yakuza. If I did my job well, you've learned something new about the Yakuza and about Team Rocket. I wonder how Giovanni will return to the main series in the future. Thank you to all of my patrons and YouTube channel members who supported the making of this video, including luxury patrons Seafood Dinner, who became a patron this month, Freebird Nerd, who upgraded this month and helped me gain access to one of the main sources that I used, and Ethan from Chicago, who actually edited this video. If you also want to become one of the Libros, click the join button below or visit patreon.com/UmbreonLibris for more perks. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next chapter.